The mountain pine beetle management program has been going on in Alberta for quite some time, as you know, Keith noted too. In 2006, MAP fired up, and that was really in response to a very large in-flight that we had in 2006. And you can see the maps here that I've got up on the screen. The left-hand side for the 2007 mountain pine beetle aerial survey sites shows where we had our real first significant beetle infestations in Alberta, and when we first started getting into the mountain pine beetle management program. We had been dabbling a little bit in mountain pine beetle management since about, I don't know, 2001, 2002, and a little bit more in 2004, and then really got into it wholehearted after 2006 and 7. The map on the right-hand side is the current geographic distribution of where we do our aerial surveys and where mountain pine beetle is located in the province. So you can see that we've got a bit of a change in the distribution from where we originally had it, which was, you know, the Peace River, Smoky area, Grand Prairie area. Now we're looking more around the Hinton, Edson, down through Rocky Mountain House and over into the Slave Lake area. So since over the last decade, the GOA has spent $6.1 million in research. When we first started looking at the mountain pine beetle program and investigating some of the impacts and everything that could be happening, we did note that the majority of the research, because we hadn't had infestations in Alberta before, were either developed in BC during the earlier infestations or during the current infestation that they had just come through. So we felt that research was a really valuable place for us to invest some funding, to be able to have some Alberta-based research for us to base our decisions on. And so for this $6.1 million, we have supported the FRI research for the Mountain Pine Beetle Ecology Program. We also provide an annual grant to SURGE, which is a research organization that is all of Canada and also the states. So there's a variety of stakeholders and participants in that. And we've also provided direct grants to different organizations for specific projects. Keith mentioned TRIA. That was one of the larger ones that we did commit funding to directly. And so what are the outcomes of the research and what have we got for our $6.1 million? Not just over the last decade, not just in terms of from the FRI research, but overall. So quite often when folks look to research, they're wondering, you know, is there policy that's been supported by these research findings? This is kind of the holy grail for some folks. Did the research contribute to a new or change an existing policy? That's quite often the question that we get as a performance metric for research. In this case, no. There is no like regulation or directive or interpretive bulletins that I can point to that was written due to the outputs of research. But if we aren't influencing policy, then where are these results being used? Well, I would say it's being used actually where it matters more, and I'll get into that. So Keith already showed this slide, but the Mountain Pine Beetle Ecology Program research themes were set up at the start of the program just to guide the questions that we were looking to have answers to. So the themes have been reviewed a few times over the life of the program, and they've remained fairly consistent. The research themes are fairly broad, and when I'm looking at where research has made a difference, I changed up the themes more to be about operational themes. The questions and the projects were designed to answer operational questions for us. So this is how I organized these. So are we making the right decisions? We make decisions all the time in the Mountain Pine Beetle program, and are we making them? Are we making the right decisions? Are our decisions effective? Very important to understand that. Can we improve our program? Are there different choices we need to make? Are there improvements? Are there efficiencies that we can find. And theme 4, what happens next? So there are too many projects to highlight them all. I think Keith said that there were 40 projects funded so far under the MEP program. So I mean, obviously I won't be able to highlight them all, so I just wanted to organize some of my thoughts into these operational themes. So the first decision that we had to make back in 2006 and 7 really was, are we going to initiate a mountain pine beetle management program? You know, knowing that it had to be long-term. You can't just get into mountain pine beetle management and think you're going to be done in a couple of years. It doesn't quite work that way. Knowing that it was going to be expensive, and I'll touch on funding in a little bit, and knowing that we really had to integrate with the other land managers and stakeholders out there. Also knowing that there were impacts of not getting into a program. So there would be, economic impacts to the forest sector, a whole variety of environmental impacts, and then again, knowing that there would be financial costs to the department, quite significant, the manpower resources and how we were actually going to physically manage a program. So these were all things that we started to really discuss and try to understand. So what really tipped the scales too in our favor was the public perception. So knowing that there was a study that was conducted, and it really tipped the scales for us in that the public actually believed it was the right thing to do. They believed that the forest had a variety of values, and those values were important. And overall, publicly, people were on board with us implementing a management program. So that study really contributed to our determination for initiating a program. And we've also used it throughout the years as a way to secure funding during difficult and tight economic times. So this slide here, kind of a funny slide. Latest research has shown people will believe anything you say if you put latest research has shown in front of it. Operational decisions that we make, we really actually need to have real research. When you're managing an insect and managing a natural resource, it's critical to be able to inform or back up the decisions that you are making and be able to point to actual latest research. So this graph here, are we making the right choices? We cannot control all of the trees on the landscape. We have to be very selective on which ones we can control and where. So the graph that I've got there on the top right, left-hand side is the mountain pine beetle ground survey sites. So the first thing that we do down in the fall is get onto the ground and actually find the individual attacked trees. So we do survey between 10 and 14,000 sites per year, and then we initiate control at those sites. So we usually average about 90,000 to 100,000 trees per year. We use a decision support system that helps guide us, but we use other information to fine-tune the outputs of the decision support system. So this leads us to kind of the next operational question. Are our choices effective? The GOA has invested over $568 million in the mountain pine beetle management program since 2004. This doesn't include the $30 million for the current operating year and the $30 million in each of the next 2 operating years that we've already been allocated or that we know will be coming. Also too, we have entered into a joint program with the Government of Canada for this year and for the next 2 operational years, where the Government of Canada will be providing $60 million over these 3 years towards the mountain pine beetle management program. So the $60 million is over and above the annual funding provided by the Government of Alberta. This isn't change that you can just find in your couch. And as you can imagine, we have been asked numerous times to justify this program and what we are getting from this sizable investment many times. Each year we do provide briefing notes to the ministers and other senior executives throughout the government, also to Treasury Board and Finance, and we really need some solid evidence to be able to prove efficacy of the program. Previously, we've only had metrics, and some of them Keith showed there about, the GDP values for the provincial forestry sector, values of the timber to the crown, and metrics for employment statistics for, again, the forestry sector. And also, in order to be able to work with the Government of Canada, we also needed to be able to prove some very strong metrics. So are our choices effective that we're making? We do now, through research conducted through FRI, we do have evidence that supports and justifies that our program is effective and that overall we have made good choices. We have been able to decrease the scale and the impact of the mountain pine beetle infestations in Alberta, which is excellent information for us to have to justify the program. However, can we improve our program? And the answer is always yes. We can always do better. The mountain pine beetle program has always looked for continuous improvements. We do an annual review each year to find efficiencies. So how can we improve our program, and how have we improved our program? We can now make better operational decisions based on the outputs from the research that has been conducted through the FRI research program. We can make better operational decisions based on improved detection of low populations. This is very important for us in order to be able to determine where we need to monitor for the mountain pine beetle, if the mountain pine beetle is actually expanding its range. When we're not seeing a lot of red attacked trees from the aerial surveys, we have to be able to detect them from the ground. That way also too, our other partners like Saskatchewan, we can be informed about if they are again moving east or if they're starting to contract back to the west. We can also make better decisions on understanding the individual tree attack densities for lodgepole and jack pine. We don't, like I said, control all of the trees on the landscape. So when we are looking for areas of infestations that require control, we are looking at attack densities and how many mountain pine beetle are attacking individual trees, how many are in the stand. So understanding that really can help us fine tune the areas that we work in. We can also fine tune our decision support system based on stand characteristics, stand resilience, and other information that leads us to think of how the spread rate for the mountain pine beetle could be. So areas that have better spread rate potential based on a variety of stand factors is important. Another thing that we can take a look at as well when we're determining the areas that we are going to work in is whether or not the beetles will persist in the long term. And again, information on this is very important from both the climatic side as well as the stand characteristic side. Because we're in mountain pine beetle management for the long term, if beetles will enter into an area and persist only for a few years, and the risk of them persisting in large populations or growing into larger populations, if that risk is low, then that area would receive a low priority for control because in the long term they won't persist. So endemic or epidemic population risk and the cold tolerance work has provided us a lot of information on fine-tuning again the areas that we control. what we have to remember is that we're managing mountain pine beetle, but we're also managing the forest resource as a whole. So while we have important decisions to make in terms of the beetle, of the actual beetle itself, we have to make informed decisions about understanding and mitigating the impacts of the infestation. So this picture here is a picture from Alberta. It's actually from south of Hinton. The information that we need to manage the forest resource to provide sustainable resource values when faced with mortality, such as this is depicted in the picture, you know, some cases fairly significant mortality. It's important that information on managing the natural resource actually comes from Alberta in our stands and in the ecotypes that we have here. So when we're making decisions on the resource management, we have to look at harvest priority. So which stands will recover on their own from mountain pine beetle attack? Once density of attack within these stands, what is the impacts of that? If the stands have, you know, low attack densities overall, then you know it's more likely that they will recover on their own, or the impacts will be fairly slight. However, in areas where we have high beetle impact, which ones of those should be harvested to bring back into production? That leads us, you know, into those questions of succession as well. If these stands are not harvested, what will the succession process look like? So what will, in the long term, be in those stands? We have to look at that and think of these stands in terms of the long-term fiber supply. We also have impacts to water. That's been a big question, is what happens at the stand level? What happens more as well on the watershed? And so the work that has been done for that gives us an idea of all of these impacts as they, you know, cumulative impacts that we're looking at when we're determining harvesting on the landscape and those resource management questions. Habitat impacts, that's also a big thing for us, and the trade-offs, you know, which is more beneficial or which is more harmful, the actual management of mountain pine beetle or the impacts of mortality in some of these habitat areas. Also, community resilience. This picture here is Whitecourt. A lot of communities in Alberta rely on the forest sectors for their primary and secondary employment. So that's another consideration, that when we're developing, you know, when we developed overall the mountain pine beetle program and taking a look at the areas that we control and the impacts, what are the impacts to community resilience? The you know, the decision to undertake the mountain pine beetle program was also based on this, and some of the work through FRI really shows that you know, the networks built around community resilience and impacts forestry sector, it all ties in so strongly that we really do have to consider that in a significant way as well. Another benefit to research, and it's maybe not highlighted all the time, is the networks that it builds. At the start of the infestation, when we were developing the project or the program and coming up with a decision support system and some of the decisions that we made, we really had a very small network of experts that we relied on for advice and for input. When we first started, we really dealt with the experts at CFS at the Pacific Forestry Center. And over the span of the years, we have really developed a network that is much, much expanded. So we have many more research partners who we can reach out to for advice, for input. We have a lot of strength in the numbers and the diversity of the researchers that we deal with. And I really feel that with the network that we have developed and the researchers that we work with, and you know, bringing new researchers into the fold, there aren't a lot of questions out there that I don't think we couldn't have answered. So that's very important. Also, too, one of the benefits of the research that's been conducted, and this really is you know, a hats off to Keith and the FR program, is that the research has been presented in a way that everybody can understand the research and utilize the research. So that's been a very big benefit too, is that it's synthesized down to an operational level, and that operational folks and people making land management decisions and mountain pine beetle management decisions can understand and also explain. As part of the Government of Canada and Government of Alberta program, I'm happy to say that as part of that program, there is a significant research component as well. So we will be initiating that with Keith and Caroline Whitehouse of the GOA, working towards implementing and continuing the important research that we have been conducting. This actually is my final slide. It went quite a lot quicker than I had anticipated, so we'll have some time for some questions if there are any. I just thought this was a cute meme, spending hours reading through research articles, and my reaction every time I find exactly what I need. So again, when we're looking for making these operational decisions and we're looking for a little piece of the puzzle to fill in, we can look to the research that has been conducted through FRI research and other organizations and be able to come up with real evidence to help guide us in our operational decisions, and then also to in the back end to justify our decisions that we're making and be able to prove efficacy and be able to look for efficiencies in our program.